Why don't we just get started with maybe a little bit of a mindfulness practice together? I don't know about you, but this last week has been unusual, different, unprecedented. I can think of many other ways to describe it. It's been a bit of a wild ride, and I'm guessing many folks feel the same way. So it's helpful just to take a moment to ground ourselves. So just take a moment to feel into your experience. Maybe for you, that is grounding yourself in awareness of your breath, grounding yourself in awareness of your hands or your feet. Maybe even just looking out the window if you're near a window where you can look outside. Just being here. We are all in this together. So maybe we can go ahead and get started with this office hours. I just want to first welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us wherever you are in the world. I see folks from all over the world, which is wonderful. It's this community. I just want to wish everybody well. To start with, I hope you are safe. I hope you are really maintaining your social distancing. This is really the best way to help this virus burn out. And I also want to thank Josh Roman, who's running text here for us. He's the Chief Product Officer at Mind Sciences. And so he will help field questions as we go through. So I think most of you probably know who I am, and I'm Dr. Judd Brewer. I'm what am I? I'm the Director of Research and Innovation at the Mindfulness Center at Brown University. Also founded Mind Sciences to develop some of these app-based mindfulness training programs to help people change habits like smoking, overeating, and even anxiety. Many of you may have seen the YouTube videos that I've been putting out over the last couple of weeks with my little pitch in to try to help. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, you can take a look at that and see if those videos are helpful, and subscribe, and you'll get updates when I put a new one out. So the format for today is pretty simple. What I thought I would do is start with just a couple of minutes on kind of a hot topic, and then really just open it up to questions from you all, so that you can ask questions around the mental health related issues that are facing us all today. And I thought we could start with something that I've really been seeing a lot of lately and had some questions about, which is around the spread of misinformation and how that why that happens and how we can combat it. And I posted on Twitter this morning a really nice article in The Atlantic. These folks just highlighted a couple of different things that we can pay attention to around checking our sources, checking our biases, making sure that what we are posting or tweeting or talking about is helpful, is kind. And I also posted this very short practice that I had learned as WAIT, wait, why am I talking, as a great practice to kind of check in with myself. If I'm about to say something to somebody, to ask, what is it that I want to say? Am I grounded in a place to really convey some information that's helpful, and ideally that is said in a kind way? So I thought we could talk a little bit about how this, what happens in our brains here with regard to this. And we can think about this. Most of this goes back to our survival brains, which are, there to help us survive, to remember where food is, to avoid danger. And if we look at this from a food gathering perspective, this memory is set up so we can actually go and find food. But when there's an abundance of food sources, our brains start to get confused and like, oh, am I supposed to turn left at that tree or right at that tree? And so when there's a lot of information, when there's an abundance of food, for example, for our ancient ancestors, it could get overwhelming. In today's world, we see this with an abundance of information sources. And so when there are a bunch of information sources, it can be really challenging to know what to go to. And sometimes it can just feel overwhelming to the point where, we just throw up our hands and say, I don't know what to go to, especially if those information sources are giving us conflicting information. Now, here's a really important point, which is for our ancient ancestors, we were gathering the information ourselves. So we were either, hunting and gathering, where we would go and find the food source and we would go and tell our tribe, or somebody that was near and dear to us would be doing that. And they would say, okay, this is where the food is. So we could trust them. And our brains are, kind of set up to trust this type of thing. In modern day, not everybody is out to help us. They might have their own agenda in mind when they are trying to convey information, and so we might get skewed information. We might get some information that kind of helps, doesn't tell a whole story and whatnot, and that's where we can start to get conflicting or even misinformation spread, and that can be problematic because, well, for not only because it distracts us from the task at hand, but also can make it really challenging for us to have to differentiate these news sources. On top of this, when we are really afraid, our thinking brains, which help us sift through information and decide what is helpful and what isn't helpful, that part of our brain goes offline, and we resort to this survival brain, which just, kind of assumes that all information is good information. So it's really important to be able to notice that, and notice that our survival brain isn't set up to differentiate fake news from real news. So we need to give ourselves a grounding so we can come back, our brains can come back online, and that thinking brain can come in and say, okay, survival brain, this is what fake news is, welcome to the real world, or welcome to the 21st century. So I think that it's really important that we know these things. One, our survival brain kind of is a little too trusting in some sense. The second thing is that the scarier the information, the more our thinking brain is going to go offline and is going to rely on our survival brain, which is why many people have probably seen fear-based advertisements in political elections in modern times. Parties figured out that they can try to use fear as a way to have people's thinking brains go offline so that their emotional brains do the voting for them. And that's, for a number of reasons, very dangerous. We don't want our survival brains electing our public officials. We want our thinking brains to be doing that. So if we know that our thinking brains go offline, we can be prepared for that, and then we can find ways to help our thinking brains come online. A couple of simple things that we can do is, one is make sure we're not posting on social media. We're not doing things when we're in survival mode. I've talked about this in some of my videos where we need to make sure we ground ourselves before passing on information. This is where the WAIT acronym comes in. Why am I texting? Why am I tweeting? And this, this is especially important with social media. So we spread actual and accurate information through social media rather than continuing the spread of disinformation. So hopefully that as a framework for, that gives us a framework for understanding, why some of the misinformation gets perpetuated faster than accurate information, because our survival brain is trying to tell the tribe, hey, there's danger here, there's danger, you should look out. But if we can step back, we can realize, wait a minute, that's actually creating more danger than it is helping. And we've seen this in the United States, where some of the national public radio stations have stopped broadcasting, just as an example, Trump's daily addresses, because the information in those is not accurate much of the time. So it's really important to all of us to band together, find these accurate information sources, and then be perpetuating accurate information so that we can all move forward together, rather than getting scared and then following the herd. So I think that's probably good place to pause. What I'd like to do is take questions first on that topic, the spread of misinformation, that type of thing, and then we'll open it up to more general questions around the mental health and the coronavirus anxiety as we're thinking of it. So feel free to first post questions about this topic that I just talked about. And then second, you can post questions more generally. And Josh has been kind enough to offer to help curate those, and he's going to send those to me through our Slack channel. So as he starts to pull those together, and as you start to post those, it's a great time for us to practice getting our thinking brains online and optimize. And no better way to do that than just to drop into our present moment experience and take a mindful moment. So just take a moment to drop into your experience. What's it like to just have received that information that I put forward? What's it like to simply rest in awareness of your breath or your body, or seeing or hearing around you? Whatever anchors you in the present moment. So, Josh, are there any questions related to this topic? And if there aren't, okay, so nothing specific to this topic. So if folks want to learn more about that, you can look at my YouTube video from today. I just posted it this morning. So now let's open it up to broader questions. So what are you noticing? What are you struggling with? What questions you have around anxiety, around any of these things that we've been exploring over, whether it's in my YouTube videos over the last week or just anything more broadly? Okay, so we've got a question. How can I deal with anxiety about still being required to go to work? I feel bad, like I'm not doing my part. Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is where it'd be great if we could be having a conversation. So this will be a little bit of a one-sided conversation, but hopefully it is. This will be helpful. So often, the many, if not most of us, are really, we're still expected to do our duties at work. Yet, I don't know about you all, but working from home, especially as we're trying to shelter in place, can be really challenging. Not only are we expected to, shoulder our full workload, but at the same time, we may be homeschooling. We may be trying to negotiate, time for a quiet space on Zoom, for example, with our partners who may be needing the same thing. There are a lot of different demands that are coming up. So the first thing I would say here is, we can check in and say, if we have thoughts that come up, like this person's question, I feel bad, like I'm not doing my part. If somebody is feeling, like, oh, am I not doing my part? We can first check to see, do we have a habit around kind of thinking that we're not doing a good enough job, or we should be doing better than we can actually do. And I see this a lot, both in my clinic, but also in our programs, where people have habit loops around thinking that they're not good enough. And that can actually skew our vision of, what is real, and actually make us less effective, and so on. So the first thing I would say here is we can check in with ourselves to see, are these thoughts actually just part of a habit loop that are, where I'm judging myself, or is this actually something where I am legitimately, not doing my part? And this is where, good communication comes in. So checking in with our teammates, checking in with our bosses to see what is expected of us right now, because I think everybody's trying to pivot to, have a new normal, and then come to a very simple agreement around, what is going to be, what is going to be expected, how can we pitch in. And also, I think it's important to communicate to our teammates and so on, what we're actually dealing with. For me, when I'm working with teammates or my lab or whatever, if I don't know what they're struggling with, if I don't know that they've got extra childcare duties at home or some other burden, it's really hard for me to be able to put myself in their shoes. And I might just say, okay, I'm expecting you to do this amount of work. Whereas if I knew that there was some special circumstance, and many of us have these right now, then I could work with them to help adjust what is expected, what is reasonable. So hopefully that gives the person that asked this question, and anybody that's struggling with that, which is probably many of us, a little bit of food for thought and ways that we can start exploring how to work with those. So there are a couple of related questions. And I think these might have been also related to the topic that I just mentioned. So let's go back to these. So the first one was, how can we use our knowledge of habit loops and the patterns that they reveal to help us during a newscast or when receiving information around the coronavirus? That's a really good question. So I say this a lot, and I'll happy to repeat it over and over and over. If we don't know how our minds work, it's going to be really challenging to work with them. So as this person was pointing out, the knowledge of our habit loops is a really good place to be able to know how our minds work so that we can learn to work with our minds. And this person continued, the patterns that they reveal, how can they help us during a newscast? So for example, if I have habit loops are set up trigger behavior results, if there's a trigger, like a certain politician says something, and then my habitual behavior is to think, oh, that person's stupid, or I can't believe that person said that, or whatever, or the opposite, wow, that person's great. I wish this person would say more. Then the result is that our brain gets some type of a reward, whether it's self-righteousness, like, oh, can't believe this person's saying this, or kind of adoration, like, oh, I can't wait to hear this person talk more. Just being able to see these habit loops and how they bias us is really helpful to be able to step back from the process to look more objectively. It's interesting, the ancient Buddhist psychology, they actually talk about ignorance perpetuating this whole process. And the way that I and my lab have written about this in scientific papers is we talk about this as being subjective bias, because we're actually starting to see the world in a certain way. I think of this as subjective bias lenses. We're seeing the world through certain glasses. For example, that we've probably all heard the term rosy colored or dark colored glasses. If somebody is very Pollyannish and is seeing the world, always seeing only the positive things in the world, they're not seeing accurately because they've got these rose-colored glasses on, and they have to take those off to see that the world isn't always that way. The same is true for people who have anxiety or depression, who are constantly seeing the world through lenses of, oh, things are really tough or really terrible. So here, if we can start to see those biases that we have, we can take those glasses off and see clearly, so that if we're biased in a certain direction and we notice that we start to get pulled, we get sucked in, like, oh, this is so great what this person is saying, or, oh, this is so terrible what this person is saying, it can help us develop a more balanced view where we can see, oh, there's my mind reacting in this certain way. In that moment, we can already learn something about our own minds, which is always helpful. And also in that moment, we can step back and it helps us see, oh, wait a minute, you know, that seems a little too good or too not good. Let me check, let me check those facts. And it can help us step back to be able to see, wait a minute, this sounds a little off, and use our intuition to look, do some fact checking, instead of running off and, screaming, this person's terrible or this person is great. So, very, very useful ways to use this knowledge about habit loops, not only to see our own biases, but also to help us see these in order to be able to step out of them. So there are actually two more related questions. I'll read these together. So one is, if the news is pessimistic, but from a credible network, what can we do to not get afraid? And the second is, the morning I read 100 to 200,000 deaths in the US that are possible. How do we sit with those numbers and at that same time not panic about how bad this could get? Yeah, I think that's a really good question. Both of those as related questions are really good. So one thing we can look at here is, the word pessimistic catches in my mind, because this also can reveal, where we can even have subtle subjective biases. So I think what we all are looking for right now is accurate information. And that accurate information, as the second person pointed out, hearing, and I just heard this for the first time today as well, that there are projected to be a huge number of deaths just in the United States alone. And so this could be seen as accurate, but also our brains can interpret this as pessimistic. And I think it's really important to be able to differentiate, what is accurate information and not good news, right? Nobody wants to hear that we're going to have a large number of deaths, but at the same time, be able to move forward in a balanced way that doesn't lead us to be pessimistic and then also perpetuate more pessimism in others. So I think I may be interpreting this differently than the person that asked the question, but I see pessimism as a slight form of subjective bias, where we're like, oh, there's going to be X and that sucks, or that's going to be terrible, or that's not good. That slight judgment on top of that is what moves that accurate information into a slight subjective bias, where we're like, oh, this is happening and I don't like that. So already right there, we can use this, what we know about our own minds, to be able to step back and say, oh, there's my mind spinning out an editorial on top of this accurate information, assuming that the information is accurate. So there we can step back and look to see, oh, do I have a view on this as compared to, am I able to take in that information? And does that view actually make it harder to actually hold that information and work with it carefully? The stronger the view we have, the harder it is for us to actually work with information accurately, because the more we move into our, habitual and emotional minds, and the less we are able to stay in our thinking minds. The old Star Trek television show, where it was Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock, I think, really portrayed these two parts of the mind beautifully, where Captain Kirk was very emotional and he was always rushing around, based on his emotions. And Mr. Spock, as the Vulcan, was said to have no emotions. He would say things like, "That's highly illogical, Captain," because he would act purely on reason. Now, as humans, we have both of those parts of our minds, and the emotional part is a beautiful part as well as the thinking part. And importantly, we need to be able to bring these two together. If we get too emotional, the thinking part doesn't work at all. So, how do we sit with those numbers, as this person said, and not panic? So I think the most important thing here is to, at times when we can calm ourselves down, to remind ourselves and ask ourselves, well, what do I get from panicking? Does panic help me think? Does panic help me plan? Does panic help me calm down my family and friends and coworkers? The answer is no. Panic doesn't help anything. It just spreads more panic through social contagion. So here, taking a moment to do a mindfulness practice or prayer or yoga or whatever it is that helps us be grounded, helps that emotional brain calm down so our thinking brain can come back online. And then we can work with these numbers, as this person put it. That's how we work with the numbers, is by being a steady rock. This is where, President Roosevelt, back in the 1940s, but it wasn't really true. So the more, the higher, the more responsibility somebody has, like Roosevelt, the numbers, and trust that they are actually true. So let's take a moment just to pause and take a breath together, because I don't know about you, but hearing about those numbers was, brought a lot of sadness and heaviness in me, and really seeing the gravity of this situation just in the United States, and knowing that this is, we anywhere across the world are really suffering. Italy has been hit especially hard. So just sitting with this. Taking a breath together. Okay, let's move on to the next question. So this is about dealing with frustration and anger and seeing other people who are not socially distancing. I did a short YouTube video on this, I think last week, around how to work with anger. And so the long answer, well, the shortest answer would be take a look at that YouTube video from last week, and that'll give you, what happens in our brains. And there are 3 steps that I offered for working with anger. The other, the cliff notes on that is that it's, it starts by seeing that these are coming up, seeing how these, there's this phrase blind rage when we're really angry, how that blind rage makes it so that we can't think, just like when we're panicked. So really being able to see the results of anger, and then also know that it's hard. I've didn't notice that they're not socially distancing or whatever, or maybe they're not taking it seriously. To me, it's really important to be able to put myself in somebody's shoes before I say anything. And so here, keeping a respectful social distance, it can be helpful to ask people, like, "Oh, what's this like for you?" Or whatever, so that we can understand somebody's situation. And that helps us see more clearly, is somebody in denial? Is somebody think that everybody else is blowing this out of control, and this and that? And that's then a really good place to start having a conversation, one that is not preachy or defensive, and it doesn't engender defensiveness in others, so that we can then all move on together. I've never seen things go well, when somebody does something in public and somebody else yells at them. It tends to just elevate the anger and the defensiveness, and both stomp off saying, "I can't believe that jerk, I was right." And that doesn't help us come together. It doesn't help anybody move forward. And frankly, it kind of shocks the people around them. So the more we can keep calm as we all carry on together and really try to understand somebody's situation, the more that helps us not jump to conclusions, and inadvertently make things worse by saying, "Oh, you should be socially distancing." And not that the person that's asking the question was suggesting that, but I'm just pointing that out based on what I'm seeing. So frustration, anger, real. Everybody's fuses are shorter than I think I've ever seen in the world. And that's also something for us to just keep in mind. This is an unusual time. We're all adjusting. it's being thrown out of our routines. I don't know anybody that likes to be thrown out of their routine. And so as that dust settles, I think that that will settle down a little bit with it. But in the meantime, we can really just notice those things. And again, mindfulness practices are really good at helping us. So this next question is, just pull it up. How do we balance taking one day at a time with longer term planning for what ifs, given all the uncertainty about how long we'll be locked down and the more time before things return to normal? Knowing how to reach a productive balance in work, personal life, etc., has been challenging. Yes. To put it mildly, challenging. The most important thing that our brain needs for planning is accurate information. And often it can make us really impatient to make a decision, and we'll often make decisions without enough information, and then that tends not to go so well. So I think the first thing here is to step back and just ask this simple question, do I have all the information that I need to plan for, say, a month from now? I don't know about you all, but the only thing right now that I can plan for a month from now is probably that I'm still going to be in social isolation, at least a month. In the United States, we absolutely have to do that. So I have enough accurate information looking at the epidemiologic data and whatnot to know that this being working from home is going to be my new norm for the next month, at least. And so that helps me from home. As far as some of the other details of my life, and this probably goes for all of us, those are much more murky, and those are going to have to emerge as the circumstances kind of present themselves. So here I find it really helpful to check in with ourselves and say, am I trying to force things without having enough information? And instead, can I step back and simply see if I can rest in the not knowing? This is I think this comes from Zen practice, the don't know mind. Can I be okay with not knowing? Can I be okay with not making a decision for a month from now when I don't have enough information? And one thing that can help inspire, what have we gotten from those? And that can help get us less excited about, jumping to a conclusion or making a decision before we really have the information to do that. So I find that really helpful, is checking in. Am I trying to force a decision because I feel restless? Okay, can I get curious about what restlessness feels like in my body and use that as a mindfulness practice? Bow to it as a teacher and say, oh, what can I learn from this about me? And at the same time, can this help me step back and not rush a decision when I know that if I rush that decision, it's going to actually possibly make things worse, and certainly won't help things. So I think for all of these, this person had asked about, knowing how to reach a productive balance in work, personal life, etc. That's an ongoing question probably for all of us. And that's a question, this reminds me of Rainer Maria Rilke, where he wrote in this book, Letters to a Young Poet, he talked about loving the questions themselves. This was slightly different circumstances. This was a young poet trying to learn poetry from the master. But I think it also applies to us. Can we learn to love the questions? Like, oh, okay, how do I reach this productive balance in work and life? Oh, can I just love that question? And as Rilke puts it, live some day into the answer. And there I think he really gives the key, which is, I don't have the answers today. I can't force the answers today. But if I love the questions themselves, it will open me to the answers when they come. I certainly find this to be very, very helpful when I don't know the answer to a scientific question. So many more times to just be okay with that uncertainty, because the answer comes so much more clearly later and is so much better that is much more rewarding for my brain. And so it's much easier for me now. It's taken years, but much easier for me now to rest in that not knowing and explore it. Oh, what does this feel like? And be okay with it, knowing that, the answer, I will have the information that I need for the answer, when that information comes. So I hope that is helpful. And I just want to acknowledge how challenging this is. I'm sure for the person that wrote this question and for all of us, you're really speaking for us all. So maybe we can take a breath and just rest in not knowing. Not knowing even what our breath is going to do in the next moment. Is it going to be deep or shallow? Just being curious, what does my larger decisions that we are all working with? So thank you for that question. Let's go on to the news. Turning to food as a coping mechanism. Such a great question. And this is really at the heart of this, what I'd been seeing for years when I was studying the mechanisms of mindfulness around habits. And, we even formed made this app called Eat Right Now to specifically train people to understand how their minds work around this. So, the first thing I would say here is to be able to map out these habit loops around stress eating. So stress being the trigger, eating being the behavior, and then see, what's the result of that behavior. So already we've made a step forward because we can start to see that clearly in our minds. Thinking of a patient, I don't remember if I mentioned him last week, who came to see me for panic disorder, and he was stress eating to cope with his anxiety. And within 2 weeks of him just mapping out those habit loops, he stopped stress eating. He lost 14 pounds and went on to lose about 97 pounds. But the important thing for him was that he was, one, mapping out these habit loops around stress eating, and two, what he said to me was, they don't help. They don't make my anxiety better. Two, I think of this as a 3-step process. So the first step is mapping out these habit loops. The second step is being able to see clearly what the result of the behavior is. That's actually what drives future behavior. And that's how reward-based learning works. It's that reward or lack of a reward that drives future behavior. If we're stress eating, we can actually get in the habit of stress eating, and that can get perpetuated, especially if we're at home and our refrigerator is constantly right in front of our faces. So if we can map this out and we can start to see, what am I getting from the stress eating? Is it helping me? Just like my patient who was paying attention and seeing that it wasn't helping, it makes it much easier to let go of that habit. And then we can bring in the third step, which is bringing in the bigger, better offer. So our brain is always looking for something better. If it sees that stress eating isn't very rewarding, then it says, well, what's better? And that's when we can simply bring awareness, mindfulness practices in. So if we can check and ask ourselves, well, what do I need right now? Why is it anxiety? We can address the anxiety itself as the root cause. And so here, mindfulness practices help really well. We have a paper that's going to be published probably this week showing that mindfulness helps anxious physicians reduce their anxiety by 57%. So mindfulness practices, pretty good evidence base for mindfulness in helping with that anxiety. And that can get at the root cause, helping treat the anxiety rather than the symptom, which is the stress eating. And that symptom can kind of let go of itself as we see really clearly that it's not helping anything. So that's what I would recommend, follow that 3-step process to develop mindful habits rather than stress eating habits. So thanks for the question. Let's just take a breath together before we go on to the next question. And just notice what that feels like to take a breath. Is that a bigger, better offer than getting caught up in a worry habit loop? Certainly is for me. So this next question is, I'm anxious about getting coronavirus. I keep having phantom symptoms. Is this normal? What can I do? Just based on what I've seen and heard and talked to people about, this sounds pretty normal to me. And I'm sure, all the other folks on the call can relate to this. It's like, oh, I went out to the grocery store, and I feel a scratch in my throat. Do I suddenly have coronavirus? And so here, having phantom symptoms, this is really important to be able to ground ourselves in our direct experience and be able to just notice phenomena arise, and use that mindfulness to help keep a virus. And we can even map out habit loops that that feed those phantom symptoms that then can feed on themselves, because they can make us more anxious, and then we can have more phantom symptoms and this and that. Again, importantly, it's really helpful here to help our brains stay calm, keep that emotional brain in balance, so that our thinking brain can come back online and remind us, oh, well, you haven't been out for a week, and so this phantom symptom is probably a phantom symptom. And the more we can really notice those really clearly, the more it helps us differentiate, oh, here's the list of actual symptoms. I have actually been in a place where I've been exposed, versus, and then, where we need to call somebody, we can do that and check in with our doctor or whatever. And where we can see that this is just our brains freaking out a little bit, it can help us not overburden the medical system by calling and saying, oh no, maybe I, where we get stuck in those loops. So, the answer again here is mindfulness practice to help keep us grounded, keep our thinking brain online. So thank you for that question. I'll just add that as I went through medical school, I think all of us in my medical school class had phantom symptoms from just about every disease pathology that we were studying as we went through second year of medical school. It's like we'd learn about this, and then suddenly we'd have symptoms like that. We'd learn about that, and then suddenly. So let's just take a breath together. So there's another question that comes up. This person says, I feel guilty that I'm enjoying being home with my family and pets while people are dying. Others are fighting the disease in hospitals, and there are many workers in warehouses and grocery stores who have to work for very little pay. Does the guilt actually get in the way of enjoying being home? This is an opportunity for all of us to really spend some quality time with our families. I don't know about you, but my cats are loving it that my wife and I are home. They've never gotten so much attention and so on. So just checking to see, does the guilt help anything? Is that guilt helping me actually enjoy the time that I'm spending with my family? Does it get in the way of me, doing whatever? And does it also get in the way of, is the second part of the question, feel guilty that others are fighting the disease in hospitals and many workers in warehouses and grocery stores. If we can stay balanced, we can actually ask ourselves, well, how can I be most productive? How can I be most helpful? How can I be most helpful to the world right now? And for most of us, the most helpful thing we can do is to stay home. I saw a picture somewhere on social media where there were a bunch of healthcare workers holding up signs that somebody took a picture of, which is, we are here in the hospital helping you. Help us by staying home, right? Because by staying home, people aren't going to get sick and overwhelm the hospital systems. So if we can stay grounded, we can check to see and ask ourselves and even ponder, how can I be most helpful right now? And if simply staying home is it's something that we almost all of us can do, then we can remind ourselves, wait a minute, I am being helpful. This is a public health issue, and I am directly contributing in a positive way to helping this thing not spread. That in itself is really important. And if we all do this, this is going to help all of us get through this much more quickly and without as many fatalities. If I have some time, maybe I can, and I've got the energy, I can advocate for those workers. I can, there are ways that we can pitch in where we can still make sure that we're socially distancing, but use our talents to be helpful together and be creative to see how we can each pitch in to help with the cause. So if we're balanced, we can actually step back and ask, what talents can I bring to the table? And then we can get creative with those and see how we can help. So let's just take a breath with that. Just check in with ourselves. Or any of us, do any of us have a habit loop around feeling guilty? Just grounding in our direct experience. And just taking a breath, realizing how we are all helping each other by staying home. Noticing the mind, might say, oh, that's trivial. It's not trivial. This is how we all survive this. So just take that in. We are all collectively working together, and staying home is the right thing and the best thing that we can be doing. Okay, I'm just going to check the time. We've got time for maybe one or two more. So from a mindfulness perspective, it's a great question. Thank you. So here, let's start with the, feeling dark or sad for no obvious reason. Trying to remember, I just put a video out. Sorry to sound like a broken record, but I've been putting a lot of videos out lately to try to pitch in my way to help. I put a video out maybe over the weekend on one of the key aspects of mindfulness, which is one of the biggest game changers that I've seen with this practice, and what I learned, and also what I see with the data around depression and anxiety, which is the mindfulness isn't about changing our thoughts or our emotions. It's about changing our relationship to them. And so here, if we feel sad or we feel dark, we don't have to run around trying to figure out what caused that. That often is a rabbit hole, where we get stuck in these why, why that, why. And if I could just figure out why, then I can fix it, is the implication. Here, mindfulness is about forgetting about the why and just focusing on the what. What am I feeling? Oh, I feel dark. I feel sad. Can I hold that darkness? Can I hold that sadness? Can I even welcome it in? I in the YouTube video, the malice, the anger, whatever, welcome them all. For they might be clearing you out for some new delight. And that might seem hard to swallow right now. But what he's pointing out is that we can learn from how we are relating to this. Our brains are just set up to hold on to things that are pleasant and to push away things that are unpleasant. So we can actually learn to transcend that really, that habitual reaction, and learn to embrace everything and bring in that balance as we do. Oh, here's sadness, here's darkness. Can I explore what it feels like in my body? Can I embrace it? Can I hold it? And this brings forward this saying, the only way out is through. As we turn toward our experience, that's how we get out the other end, is by not trying to push it away, ignore it, suppress it, or whatever, but simply, when we feel dark or sad, a lot of folks have had traumatic experiences. And so this may seem like it's really hard to do. There's some of our emotions can be very hard to hold. And this is where just grounding ourselves in our body, or even in external objects like grounding ourselves in our feet or our hands or looking at a tree, can also help us be in the present moment. And the data are pretty solid around, mindfulness helping people with depression, mindfulness helping people with anxiety, and so on. So hopefully that's helpful. Let's just take a breath together. Looking at the time, I think that's going to be our last question. Our own circle. How to offer kindness from isolation, feeling loving kindness toward others, basically. When you ask, I'm going to put out, put together some thoughts for a video that I'll put out tomorrow around loving kindness. So the one-liner on that is simple phrases we can offer this. Whenever we think of somebody else, whenever we see somebody else, we can offer them a phrase of loving kindness. I remember doing this in residency, where I'd ride my bicycle to the hospital, and each car that honked at me for whatever reason, instead of, I learned, it took me time, but I learned that it was much better for both of us for me to offer them kindness rather than unkindness. So take a look at tomorrow's video. You'll see a lot more about loving kindness. I'll post a loving kindness practice on this YouTube channel tomorrow as well. There's a video of me somewhere out there talking about my loving kindness practice, riding my bike to work at this, I think it was a compassion conference in Telluride from about 5 years ago. We'll see if we can dig that up, or you can search YouTube for that as well. So let's just wrap it up and take a breath together, a collective breath, maybe even practice a little bit of loving kindness, just holding ourselves and everyone on this call in our hearts in whatever way feels genuine and authentic. And knowing that we're all going to get through this, and we'll get through this much better if we do this together. So I want to thank you all for joining me today for this call. I hope that it was helpful. If you have other questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future videos, you can post them in the comments section here. You can check out some of the other videos that I've already put out. I think I'll mention that we have a new version of our free Breathe app coming out, so that has enhanced features with guided meditations. Right now, it's mostly focused on one of our evidence-based breathing exercises. So mailing list, you can just go to my website, drjudd.com, and get on the email list, and we'll make sure you get informed of all these updates. Others that you think might be in need of something like this, and I'll just say onward together. We'll see you all next week. Take care.